So it's amazing when things come together in such an unexpected way, but bringing together new friends, old friends, and where we can sit around and discuss what has been happening and what we can take away from an experience from coming and visiting and seeing firsthand the devastation and taking back the message to everyone abroad. A childhood friend, Mikey Davis, who I grew up with, to be sitting here with you after so many years is so incredible how we re-engaged with one another, and how you brought Todd Rose, a best-selling author, and someone who is really in tune with the philanthropy efforts in America, as well as the policy efforts in America, the political efforts in America, and how we can really mold that discussion or help shape that discussion based on what you've actually seen on the ground here. And Michael Eisenberg, an old friend in the VC world, to be able to really have some proper discussion here and bring to bear all of our skills and talents to figure out how we can send the message back for Todd to take with him when he leaves tomorrow. So I thank you all for being here. And Michael, maybe you can lead us off with some of your perspective and start off the discussion.
Thanks, Alex. This is really your discussion, and I hope we'll talk about what you saw, what you felt. But then I think it's very important to kind of go up a level. And what does this all mean for freedom-loving people, for people of values in the world? So I've been down to Be'eri and Kfar Aza in the areas around Gaza a couple of times. You went there today. You want to just describe what you saw and what you took out of there?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm still processing. I thought I knew what I'd see, and it's still in a modern time. The devastation, but not just that. I'll just be blunt. The pure evil of it all is something that I think people in modern society have just forgotten is even possible. It's still almost incomprehensible to me that level of brutality and just joyful brutality and disregard for human life can still exist in society today. And frankly, I'm puzzled and furious by the fact that you juxtapose that reality, which nowadays there are so few instances of good and evil, that so few like clearly black and white issues like this, and yet somehow the narrative, particularly in the U.S., for example, on certain sides and at certain age range, they've been able to invert it. Not even just muddy the water, right? That's the old game of just muddy the water. We're all kind of bad. They've been able to invert it and actually say white is black, bad is good. And so it tells me two things. One, that the reality that we saw today is indicative of an ideology that if we don't confront, that we don't take seriously, is not going to stop here. Okay, that's number one. Two, that there is something about the way that the narrative is being shaped around the world that if we don't take seriously, we could end up losing this fight, not because most decent people in the world have somehow changed their values, but they are so convinced that everybody else now believes this lie that we just end up creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I've come away with this with just both shocked, but also greater resolve, and seeing this not just specifically as an Israel-Hamas fight, but I believe this is ground zero for a battle for Western civilization.
Just to be practical before we get into the philosophical, what was the most jarring thing you saw today?
As bad as this sounds, you can get used to brutality when it's willing adults against willing adults, right? It's bad enough, actual war crimes against combatants. I'll never forget being in a room and hearing audio from what, 13-year-old girl
in her bedroom.
In her bedroom. Or going to a school. Was it a preschool, kindergarten? Preschool. And seeing the blood still on the floor and the smell. Death, right?
It's pretty stunning. 50 days later, you can still smell death there.
That's after all the bodies have been removed.
It still just, an ideology capable of being okay with that is terrifying. But can I just say, like, so juxtapose that with something I thought didn't exist on Earth anymore, which is a bottom-up resolve from good people to just solve problems. It just, this is what I want more than anything for the U.S. again, to stop relying on our politicians and these people to save us and realize we're all we've got. But it just time after time, you see the most horrific aspects of humanity juxtaposed against some of the best aspects of it. And that was jarring, actually.
One of the things you probably didn't see, because it's not on the route, is one of the villages down there. Actually, everyone was saved. How was everyone saved? Because there was a civilian readiness room that was armed, that led by a woman whose name escapes me right now. And they took out all the terrorists and got the people out the back door of the village and saved them. It was a civilian response in that case, and not the army response or institutional response that saved the people. I'll share with you, ironically, the point you made about you can kind of get used to adults killing each other. That's like almost a Stalin idea of, one person's a tragedy, 1 million people's a statistic.
Right.
And I think the kind of narrative has become about the statistic and not about the people. And the thing that got me was actually, I walked into a house in which people were killed in, but there's a yellow cupboard there in the house. I don't know if they brought you there. And in this yellow cupboard, which the bottom shelf is, I don't know, maybe 1.5 feet high. 2 girls hid for 14 hours on the phone, calling once an hour to their uncle, who was in the center of the country. And I looked at this cupboard. It was a wood cupboard that these 2 girls survived in while everyone in their house was being killed. And you think about the death that's going on in the room next door, and there was blood on the walls because somebody was killed in that bedroom. And these 2 young children, 13 and 9, or 12 and 9, survived in there out of instinct. And one of the things that really caught my attention there, in addition to the cupboard, was the paint had been peeled off the wall by these responders from Zaka, which is the organization that takes care of the dead people, but it was still on the mattress. And you just see kind of in one room, it's how to properly treat the dead, this smell or feeling of death in the room, and this survival instinct of these young kids all in one small room. I couldn't tear myself out of the room. I was overwhelmed. And then you ask yourself, I'm a parent of kids. What does this mean if I'm a parent right now? What does this mean for me? You talk about a civilian response, but if I'm a parent and I'm in Israel,
anywhere in the world,
that's what I'm saying, or New York, or in Oakland, we all saw the craziness of the Oakland City Council last night. What am I doing?
And this is, to me, the problem is that, to your point about a statistic versus an actual story, is because it's become about statistics, those kind of conversations like that are happening in Oakland can still happen because it's an abstraction, right?
They didn't come here to see what you saw. They didn't smell. Like, they didn't smell the smells you're smelling.
Yeah, like, let's have that conversation in front of the reality.
Right.
And let's hear you say, by any means necessary. And let's hear you defend the murder of children And because one of two things is going to happen. You really didn't mean it, or you did. And let's let your fellow citizens know who you are and what you believe. But I think the more that look, you've got a war on your hands here, right? But we've got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We do. We have to tell these stories because they're the truth. I will tell you one other thing that just, because again, I'm processing on the fly here, but we talk about soldiers. They're kids.
Yeah, my cousin.
They're kids.
21, 22.
They're kids.
Killed as a first responder.
They're remarkable. They're remarkable.
You
I was with them.
today.
But here's what blew my mind. I have two boys, 29, 27. They would be so much older than most of these kids that are going to fight for freedom, defend their country, and just, I was so impressed with how they carried themselves. These two young men we were with who had the incredibly difficult job of going and getting bodies, right? Which I just can't even imagine. They're taking the time to pull me aside and counsel me about how I should process this. And they told me, tonight when you get home, I don't care how late it is, sit down with your friend and talk. Have a cigar, have a drink, and just talk through it. Because if you don't, it's just going to eat away at you. I mean, these are kids giving me very good advice. But the fact that they would even care to worry about how I'm going to handle this thing, meanwhile, they have to turn around and go right back into it. Just remarkable.
You know, one of the times I was down there, so I was taken around by one of these kids, and we went to the site of the festival where, you know, these people were murdered. Hundreds of people were murdered. And he describes to me that he arrived there at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. People were dead, and the terrorists had moved on to the villages. And so they brought, this is you excuse the crassness, they brought like a pickup truck with the thing you drag, like almost a U-Haul that you drag, open air U-Haul. And he said, and they hurriedly lifted all the bodies up from there and put them on the U-Haul to take them away. And I said, well, it's such a hurry. He says, we were panicked that they'd kidnapped the bodies back to Gaza. And so we were just in a hurry to pile them on top of one another as fast as possible to get them out of here so that Hamas didn't take them back. And so I asked him, you know, what you just talked about now. I said, have you sat down to see a therapist yet? Because you're going to need to. And he said, yes, the Army sent me a couple of people, but if I'm being honest with you, that's something that's going to take years, if not a lifetime, to
And think about the
process.
resources
And
that
he's-
are going to be required for these
and he's back in
thousands and
fighting.
thousands. Yeah.
And he's back in fighting right now because that's just what there is. And he's 24, 25 years old, this kid.
Well, I think about my grandfather who fought in World War II. He could never talk about it.
Interesting.
It was a whole lifetime. I mean, even trying to talk about what happened there was too much. And you just think, luckily, hopefully, we know a lot more about mental health, a lot more stuff. But I think we can't forget that part, right? Mm-hmm. There's a war, and then there's the aftermath, and that is economic, that is helping rebuild things that were destroyed, but also helping to ensure that these young men and young women who did their part are made whole.
Let's take a level up for a second to kind of the institutionalization of this. So, you know, there were many, many women raped and then murdered in the middle of rape. There's now testimonies of these Hamas terrorists in the middle of the rape of a woman, then putting a bullet through them. Almost evil, too hard to comprehend. Yet we have kind of institutional capture, where you can't even get the UN Women's Rights Organization or other women's rights or Me Too to kind of come out and condemn this. How do you think about it? Because you're an institutional thinker also. How do you think about this kind of institutional capture that doesn't let people see just the basic evil that's out there and side with the victim in this case, right?
Yeah, look, in this case, I mean, I think we now see clearly that there is a long-running battle over two conflicting ideologies for how society should be organized. And, you know, we thought for a long time that basic liberal values had won, and that we were just arguing over the details at that point, and that's clearly not true. The fight we have moving forward is really one of, do you believe in the dignity of human beings? And that brings with it a commitment to things like individual rights and responsibility, or there's another ideology which, we saw it as Marxism before, focused on class. It lost. It didn't go away. It is blended with identity and is now framed that way. And in that ideology, we just have to be clear and not to make a straw man out of it. The view is the entire world is not understood through the lens of individuals, families, communities. It is about binary forces. That's it. Fighting it out, right? In a zero-sum world where you can only be, if you are succeeding, then it is because you have oppressed someone. And then the flip side of that, and I think the most toxic aspect of that ideology, is that in some ways, then you kind of want to be the oppressed. There's actually a morality to it. And one of the things that's like unbelievably shocking, but it's on full display now, not so much by the terrorists who their own problem, but by the people who are advocating on their behalf, who would call themselves progressives, frankly, which is pretty shocking. It's about as regressive an idea as it gets. Is that in that paradigm, there's a different morality if you're the oppressed. And you've heard it said, by any means necessary, and they mean that.
Let's double click on that for a second, because in 1948 here, there was 600,000 Jews. It was following the War of Independence. Every nickel was invested in creating a health system. It was actually created pre-state and then institutionalized. Creating a workers' union to make sure, it was also pre-state. Then you look at the kind of billions and tens of billions of dollars invested in Gaza, in water pipes, and many things that were turned into missiles and turned into a killing machine. And I think it answers to what you said, which is there is benefit, psychological, and world sympathy benefit for making yourself more oppressed. It gives you a get out of jail free card on atrocities or whatever you do. Why has this happened at this moment in history?
Well, look, first of all, also note that ideology offers no affirmative vision for society whatsoever. Mm-hmm. None.
No alternative.
None. I mean,
it's nihilistic.
It is.
Yeah.
It is about the destruction of what is,
right,
not the building of what could be. This is really important, right? I believe that how we've got here globally is that the people who care about freedom and prosperity through free societies fell asleep at the switch. There are real challenges. There are real problems with things like discrimination. That racism is real. It's not the institutional version that other paradigm likes. Yeah, exactly. That's very convenient when the game's power.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
It doesn't work so well if it's in the hearts and minds of individuals, if you're trying to capture power. But we didn't lead the efforts to address those problems. There are problems of inequality in society. We know that. We have offered very little in the way of a liberal solution to that. And so as people became resentful, and we've got a lot of data in the US on the level of resentment, it is remarkable. When you become resentful, and we're hardwired to detect that, because when something's unfair, you shouldn't cooperate anymore, right? You should start competing. When I detect that, things become zero sum, and it becomes burn it down. And you see this. So, and then all it becomes is how do I get rid of this thing that I think is driving the resentment? And quite often it turns into just demagoguery and scapegoating and violence. So I think we've got to start taking the fight to this ideology, because this is not where most people really are in private. But as you and I have talked about, it's not enough to advocate what you're against. What are you for? Let's start to paint a picture of a aspirational society that's more than just material wealth.
I think, if you took this up to the political level, you'd say that the last two politicians to advocate an affirmative view were John Kennedy and Ronald Reagan,
Yes.
probably, in the United States. When I first started my career, I was in political consulting. They sent me to see a very well-known political consultant in Israel to talk to me about campaigns, and he said to me, "Michael, there are only two kinds of political campaigns, negative and destructive." And I said, "Boy, that's really reaffirming and reassuring. Thanks." But it feels like the world's gone that way,
Sure.
right? Which is, there's only negative and destructive, rather than affirming and affirmative and uplifting. And so, what can change the narrative to get to people what you called private self?
Sure.
To get that more.
So here's the thing. For cheap hacks in politics, first of all, negative will always win in the short term because our brains have a negativity bias, 3-to-1 to positive. Makes sense.
You want to talk about the science behind that for a second? Or?
Yeah, look, think about it. If your brain's job is to keep you alive,
Yep.
not to make you happy, missing out on things that might be good for you, that's just a miss, right? Not paying attention to the thing that could kill you, that's really bad. So it's not surprising that we're going to be biased toward loss and negativity. But here's the thing. If you look at the history of truly transformative political or social movements, they all have one thing in common, and this is get back to both JFK and Reagan in the States. It's not enough to give an affirmative vision to something when you ignore the things that are frustrating and the things that are actually driving resentment, right? That seems Pollyannish. You're not going to win very many votes that way. It's all fine. If you just tap the resentment with no affirmative vision, you can marshal stuff for a while, but it always burns itself. Always. It will always bite the hand that feeds it there.
It doesn't just burn itself; it burns
everything.
Everything. That's important.
So the secret here, and I think this is what we have to get right moving forward, is social movements and political movements that succeed, they actually address people's deepest fears through their highest aspirations. And that's the best news of all, because at least in the States, we know what's driving the resentment. And it's not what people think. And we know the kind of lives they want to live, as you and I have talked about. It is not materialism. It is not about status. It is about meaning and purpose and contribution, right? The kinds of psychological flourishings that only a truly free society could ever deliver on. And at the other end, the resentment isn't just about inequality. It's actually not. It's about being controlled. People want control of their lives again. They don't want...
There's an element of parallel in the sense that this horror you've seen, but this incredible inspiration you've seen, it's the same token.
That's right.
You reach into that inspiration.
And so suddenly, the good news is the path to the kind of flourishing you and I have talked about cannot be done to someone or for someone. Only you, by making choices for yourself and pursuing things that matter to you and contributing to your community and to society, can generate the level of fulfillment and flourishing that we're talking about.
So I want to ask you a hard question on that. So what Alex just referenced and what you referenced before was the Israeli side of this. And this is a pretty self-efficacious society. I've advocated here locally that we need to get out of the government managing everything, and they should just go to orchestrating civic movements for everything other than basically defense and parts of education. But even there, they should orchestrate more, because the civic response and the self-efficacy builds a better society. We've talked about, you and I have talked about de Tocqueville before, and the kind of Protestant community ethic that America has, and that's certainly the ethic here in Israel, particularly with the mandatory service. But today you walked into Kfar Aza and Kibbutz Be'eri, and you witnessed what a negative society of "I'm going to burn it all down" did, not just to themselves, they did to other people. You witnessed the activities of a nihilistic death cult, both of them, so the other. And I think the hard question is, what do you do to turn around a people, call it Hamas and its adherents, who last night, by the way, when they released 10 or 11 hostages, yelled Allahu Akbar and mocked, these women and children walking out. How do you turn that around?
So I'd like to be wrong on this statement. I don't think you do.
You don't think you do?
I think that some people who genuinely believe so much in an ideology where they would rather die than thrive. I don't know that our efforts are best spent trying to convert them to something better. I think that there is the rest of us who are stuck in this middle where we are unhappy with the fruits of what democracy has driven in a highly industrialized, highly top-down, paternalistic society, especially in the States. I'm more concerned about the people who believe that it's in their best interest to openly advocate for this kind of death code.
Or fund the education
Or fund the education of it, quite literally, right?
The useful idiot stream,
yes,
right? The people
and
who think they're doing good here,
yeah,
so obviously not.
And to me, it's there will always be evil in the world. That's not going to go away. What we have to deal with is we have to make sure that evil doesn't have its adherents and its supporters who actually believe that they're actually doing good.
So if I harken back to your grandfather who served in the U.S. Army?
Navy.
Navy in World War II. My grandfather served in the U.S. Navy in World War II, too.
In the Pacific?
In the Pacific?
Yep.
USS Ashland. And so my grandfather's view, I assume your grandfather was the same, was that enough of Japan needed to be destroyed at the time to let the normative Japanese who were caught up in this death cult in Japan
and
emerge.
It was, right? It was.
And it was.
Because if you believe the emperor is divine,
yeah,
they're not going to stop, right? Until you make him actually acknowledge. And here's the thing. It's easy in retrospect, we often like to go over revisionists and like, well, wait, you dropped. Look at all this. Nobody wants innocent people to die. Nobody does on our side. But that wasn't the question. Because in the U.S. today, we still give out Purple Hearts. To this day, we're still giving out ones that were actually manufactured for the invasion of Tokyo.
Yep. Because they thought there was 1 million people.
We thought that that's what it was going to take.
Yep.
So the real question was, are we going to have to invade Tokyo and lose 1 million lives in the process? But at the end of the day, it is what it took. And I think what's important there is the normative Japanese. Look, at the end of the day, they're our ally now, right? It actually, here's a funny thing just as a personal level that a lot of people know. My grandfather, who since passed, obviously had a deep hatred of the Japanese for quite a while. They're Mormon. His son gets called on a Mormon mission to Tokyo. He goes to Tokyo and he falls in love with a wonderful woman. They get married. They have grandkids, or they have kids. Now my grandfather has half Japanese kids, loves them obviously, and ends up going and living in Japan for a while, falls in love with the people and the culture, and by the time he died, he had such a great affinity for the people.
Wow.
It was just remarkable.
One of the thought that jumps out is when you sit in the base today and you see kids in uniforms and they're brave and they're tough, but they look like kids, and you think about the decision-making frameworks that the U.S. talked about in sort of the era of World War II, and obviously they made dispositive weaponry decisions that flattened large parts of Japan without sending in infantrymen. And the contrast of the abject nature of the military superiority of the IDF is if they wanted to carpet bomb Gaza and not lose a soldier, they could with tremendous ease. And there's sort of this dissonance of watching folks criticize the IDF when they're putting young soldiers and reservists who are coming up, leaving their jobs, leaving their families. They're at tremendous personal risk, in order to not take the same actions the U.S. did under very similar circumstances, where you're facing an existential exterior threat with death cult sort of dynamics. And you sort of watch you get no credit for that. And there's a real dissonance in, everyone sort of takes these snippets of data and you see a short clip because of the formats that we all experience media in. But when you drive down to the south here, it feels like you're driving to Napa, right? It's sort of rolling hills. And this happened in that geography, passing orchards and farms. It doesn't feel real almost. This could have happened. And when you first went down, the cars were still piled up on the side of the road. And I thought one of the most impactful moments tonight was they've cleared the cars off the side of the road and taken them to one place. And it's endless. When you go see it, there's these burnt out cars, and you think about what happened to the people in those cars.
Each car is a story.
Each car is a clip that's gone viral and is passed around. And when you see them all in one place, you start to understand the magnitude of what happened and the human tragedy of it. But then you go around the corner where, with no government intervention at all, 6 brothers set up like a stand. And they laughed. This is the moment that jumped out at me. All these soldiers are coming to get food and to get socks and underwear and deodorant and all the sort of creature comforts that you need when you're coming in and out of hell. And the moment that struck out at me is one of the boys like, I got to go meet my mom. She's bringing soup for everybody. And I'm like, that's the supply chain? Really? But then you realize that, yes, the army is giving them food, and it's great food. But knowing...
I don't know, it's great food. That's
But someone's mom, someone's bubby is coming and bringing soup. And that's where they're going, right? Yeah. They're coming out of Gaza, and they're going to stand these incredible brothers set up to go get soup. And so people are looking for these grand gestures of what they can do and how they can help. And the bias to action that you see when you go around this country, whether it's the hostage family tent in Tel Aviv or a million little acts of kindness everywhere, is everyone in this country is fully bought in. They see their role in what it takes to do this. And
it's our kids. I got 4 kids in Gaza. It's our kids.
But I think even the folks who don't have kids
you're right.
are spanning political realms. The level of buy-in, everyone doesn't say, well, someone else is going to solve this problem, because the truth is there's no cavalry coming. And so we're watching this ground-up emergence of people who not very long ago were very publicly divided around political lines. Mm-hmm. And you can't go to any part of this country and not see absolute unity of purpose and everyone finding their place in that purpose. And and talking about the American dynamic, that's actually more pervasive here. And Israel is literally the tip of the spear on Western civilization. It's a liberal Western democracy in the middle of a really, really tough neighborhood. And that's why the lie is traveling so fast now, right? Holocaust deniers didn't credibly emerge for decades after the Holocaust. The inversion of truth has happened so much more quickly here, right? The aggressor is the victim, and the victim committed the crime, and the IDF did it. Oakland City Council meetings are like, you did this? We sat there today looking at bloodstained mattresses and toddler beds, and it wrecks you. And it's so obviously real and not manipulated and triangulated from 1,000 cameras in a million directions. They need to make this into a lie so fast, because to deal with the truth of it is to show the hollowness of an ideology that wants to strip the humanity of the Jewish people. And if people want to frame it around anti-Semitism, that feels abstract, but it isn't that at all. When you see the videos of folks tearing down, these monsters tearing down signs on 42nd and Lex, there's no Israeli flags on those signposts, right? Those are UN flags and American flags, right? Big Satan and little Satan. And so that narrative shift is, people want to believe this is sort of limited to the Jews, but this ideology is so pervasive and so fundamentally toxic and evil and bad that, Todd, to your point, it's just black and white narratives. And those are really hard to look at. And so it's easier for the people raging in the street to say it didn't happen than confront the fact that it really did. And to the point that was shared, I need to know if you believe that or if you don't, because both answers are incredibly important. Because if you believe that, we've got to reshape society that you don't have a place in that society, right, because it's incompatible with the sort of freedoms and liberal values that we all share and thought the world shared, and it clearly doesn't.
That's right.
Let's pull on that for a second. A couple of those threads. So you mentioned private conversation, and Mike just mentioned it now. That Israel is kind of the tip of the spear for Western civilization. Why do you think that's true?
Because, to what Mike just said, look, we can frame this as anti-Semitism, and it certainly is. But when you look at what that ideology stands for, it stands for the denial of human dignity. There is no place for individual rights. It is just about group-level grievance. and the justification of anything if you're not the one that's succeeding. And so I look at that and I say, look, free society is a blip in human history.
100%.
I mean, a blip. It is the most anomalous of anomalies there is. We have gotten so comfortable that it is just the way things are that we forgot that it is the exception, not the rule. I believe that if you look at this ideology, whether it takes the form of jihadist Islam or communist China, there is a common underpinning that denies almost point by point everything fundamental to liberal society. Everything. Tolerance doesn't matter anymore. Free expression doesn't matter anymore. Individual rights don't matter anymore.
Trade-offs.
And the core feature of liberal society is the belief in abundance, the capability of growing a pie. That is negated in that other ideology. That is absurd in that other ideology. So we are left fighting over a fixed pie at the group level. I mean, we are being dragged back pre-Enlightenment into an era that took us forever to get out of. And all of our global prosperity depends on the fact that we got out of that, right? The best thing to happen to humanity is the recognition of the dignity of every human being and our willingness to bake that into laws and defend that with our lives. That is what's at stake.
And we talked about the abundance versus scarcity paradigms. We sat in Tel Aviv the first night, and we're sitting at the Hilton and looking at this beautiful coastline. And if you're not Israeli, you don't understand the topography really well. Gaza has the exact same coastline on the exact same beautiful place. And Tel Aviv,
arguably even a nicer beach.
Right,
it's one of the
arguably a
nicest
nicer
beaches.
beach, right? It's perfect. And you talk about sort of this intentional scarcity, which is you want to be in a permanent state of victimhood because in the oppressor and victim narratives, being a victim is really great. And so you talk about how we assume prosperity is this goal, right? More money per capita was pumped into Gaza than any other location on planet Earth in all of history. And it's exactly the same place as Tel Aviv, and so it should have been Singapore. Everyone understands that it's not. And so what style changes, what societal choices and trade-offs got made with a lot of intentionality by players on the field and players as far away as Tehran and others, right? Such that it didn't become Tel Aviv, because obviously that was on the menu and that's not how it went.
Yeah. And the West made a mistake about that, right? The West misjudged that, which... the question I'd ask you, though, on that is, how does that relate to the fact that people are blocking tree lighting ceremonies now and toppling Christmas trees, in America? This has nothing to do, a priori, with the war in Israel, but it seems to.
When you have institutional capture and the ideology being forced on young minds, and look, I spent 12 years in a pretty prestigious university.
Once upon a time.
We educate people in the U.S. to say what they're supposed to say, to get the right grades so they can get to the college, so they can get a good job, right? They learn how to do that. It becomes very clear in college what the right answer is. And so even if you don't necessarily believe it at first, you say it and you go along. Now, here's the thing. This is something that we look at professionally. This is what we do, is this idea of we forget, look, every human being is a social creature, cares a lot about being with their groups, not against them. Nobody wants to be against their group. From a survival standpoint, that's actually really dangerous. We're not a lone wolf species, right? We are a pack species. So you're only going to go against your group when it really matters. So you take a lot of these issues and you take low information, which is like pretty clear when we do the research on these. They couldn't point out Gaza on a map.
Which river?
Like it just, they don't know. Like
right.
They don't know any of that. They do know they are resentful. They do know something's wrong with society. They don't necessarily know what. And this is always dangerous with resentment because we often feel resentful before we know the cause. It's almost never that obvious, which then leaves us susceptible to demagoguery and scapegoating. And you're seeing that in the U.S. on both sides of the political spectrum. You know, the right has absolutely scapegoated immigrants and elites. That's that kind of thing. And the left has scapegoated white people and capitalists, right? This is the narrative. But when I'm sitting here, back to your question, and I'm like, I know I'm not happy, and we become super tribal at the political level, and all I have left is being with my group. And that's like literally a proxy for living a decent life. Well, my group's winning. My life's terrible, but my group's winning. We've seen this. It's called affective polarization. You hate each other, and you literally don't even know why. New research on Republicans and Democrats in the U.S. show they're not even arguing over policy anymore. It's just on the libs, right? On the side, or like this. It's this back and forth. It's just, or
It's a football team.
It is. It's just. Well, you lost, so that means I must have won. That's it.
Let me ask you a question. I'd like to ask all of you. You saw what you saw today. You've seen it before. You've seen it today. I've seen it. How do we ensure that the message gets back about how real this was, how insane this was, how evil this was, to ensure that it doesn't happen again? I'd be curious to your takeaway from today. How do we get that message across?
Well, this is the thing: is we have to tell honest stories well, and we often like to think facts speak for themselves. They absolutely do not. They never do. And especially in an age of social media where it is ridiculously simple to manipulate the perception of reality. And there are bad actors who are very good at that. This is what we study. So we know the little thing or two about that. But we often, in an age of quantity, start to think that numbers will tell a powerful story. They never do. Individual stories, honest stories told well. We have to do that. And we all met people today who, when you hear them speak, it is just to the bone, like just shakes you, that no amount of numbers could have done. And we have to tell those stories. And we have to assume that most people, let's just talk about the U.S. right now, that most people there are good people. They may not know what's going on. They have their own lives. They're busy. They're also, we're polarized. So they're looking at like, what do we believe? Like you saw this on the right. Like we went from the ones fighting commies to like suddenly we all like Putin. Like that didn't happen because everyone changed their mind. We get manipulated pretty quick into what we think our tribe's like. The left is in that spiral right now, where these loud voices on the fringe have convinced them that this is what we believe. At the end of the day, if we don't tell these stories and tell them well, because then we are going to lose.
So we're talking about individual stories told well.
Because
go ahead.
Well, because here's the thing. All these people ripping down posters and saying things like the Oakland, like just, it's one thing to say that as an abstraction. It's another thing to say that when we all know that there was this young woman and this happened to her. Like it changes the game.
I wish that they would play those messages we heard from that cell phone today. And that,
we keep coming back to the same things. We all saw horrible things, but there's something that I've noticed that everyone today that we talked about, as we're sort of downloading in this endless car ride home in traffic, thinking about like the smells and the thoughts and the challenges of like an impossibly heartbreaking thing to see that you know you have to see, but it's hard to look at, is when you look at something absent the narrative underneath it. And even if it's horrible, that doesn't have nearly the same resonance as when we sat in that room together today. And the framing of this is one of the folks who was there, whose family this was, sat with us in this room, and he was on the WhatsApp community group where this young 13-year-old girl's voice notes were streamed. So it was on his phone. And this is the room where she was sending them from. And for 15 minutes, he just played. And she was sending them intermittently. She was saving battery. So he hits play, and you hear the increased hysteria in her voice. And that, the power of understanding what happened there as attached to her story in a very visceral way, resonated so differently than the next room over, which was just as gruesome and just as hard, But not everyone's going to get to Be'eri and Kfar Aza and see this with their own eyes. That's not possible. It's not safe. It's like it can't happen. But understanding those stories, if it hits us in person with that different cadence, then understanding the narrative underneath it and the humanity of these and not just the brutality of the imagery, that's where people can connect to it. Otherwise, it's just another visual that's detached. And in our media in World War II, it was visuals, right? But today, the short format nature of social media, it's almost always videos, right? And without the story attached to it, it becomes an abstraction and it's easy to lie about. We can't look away. And so it's almost, if they can bear the pain of it, a spotlight on people who did not sign up to be in the spotlight to talk about what happened. And I want to make an important point, which is all the oxygen in the room, for all the right reason, is focused on our living and on our hostages, right? And so there's only so much media time you can get, how much attention span you can get, and that rightfully is taken up because we need to bring our children home, and our brothers and sisters and our parents and our grandparents have to come home. And so we almost haven't had time in the public discourse, forgetting the U.S., but not even all the way here in Israel, to talk about the sort of toll of what happened. And so those exist at the same time, but as you're triaging what you're talking about, the most urgent thing feels like what you can still do that can preserve life, which is our highest priority. And that comes out all over the country, right? I know this sounds so cliched, but as much as they hate us, you come around this country and it's like this endless stream of love, like all sorts of strangers, and Israelis are pretty prickly people, right? You get a lot of hugs in this country all of a sudden. I lived here for a while, I've done business here. I didn't get a lot of hugs before from strangers, and that, Todd, I know you've gotten,
yes, I have.
gotten a lot of hugs.
So just as we wrap up, Michael, can we get your thoughts on how we get the message forward? How are we going to move the needle in the discussion?
Just for a second comment on what Mikey said, because I think inevitably free societies fight these battles with two hands tied behind our backs. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important to note. We are respectful of people's privacy. And so, the country won't show the atrocity videos because the families don't want their family members' tragedies paraded around. And that makes it difficult to tell the stories. That's why, these are one-time use videos. And I've seen the atrocity videos. They're horrific, but they're not being shown en masse or released to the public, except for what Hamas did, because we care about the individual rights and the privacy of these people. So we fight these battles with a hand tied behind our back. You made the point before. The only country in the world required to do surgical strikes is Israel. It's ridiculous. As I have a friend of mine who says, we really suck at genocide because our morality, the liberal morality where we value life, means that we do surgical strikes. Yes, do civilians get killed? Yes, they get killed because it's a war. Is it terrible that civilians get killed? Yes, it's awful that civilians get killed. But when I was with Elon Musk, he said, the real question you have to ask yourself is, where would you prefer to be a POW? In Israel or in Hamas's hand? I think the answer is really clear. That tells you who's on the right side of history. And so we fight these wars with two hands tied behind their back. That's one point. The second point is, it's not enough. I totally agree with Todd. We need to tell personal stories. At the same time, people absorb personal stories with their frames of reference and the frames that have been created for them in their groups and in the education they're getting. And we need to systemically clean up the educational system. In California, it's been absolutely poisoned, to use in the U.S., but in many parts of the Western world, it has been captured over the last 20 years while everyone's been asleep by forces that are not friendly to Western values. And that's why I think Israel's the tip of the spear, because we've actually done a pretty good job in this country of keeping, what I call the TikTok nonsense out of educational books. But we have a narrative framing to do so that people can accept these stories in the proper frame of reference. But I think the most important thing, having said all that, is a call to action. And if we don't empower people to do something, not just talk, not just absorb, not just learn, not just watch, what are you going to do to make our societies better, democratic, liberal societies better? What gives them purpose in doing that is positive? We're going to have this nonsense of all these people at the Oakland City Council who've got nothing to do.
That's right.
Moaning and complaining and feeling victimized. And we have to empower them to go do something. And that's the most important thing.
And I'm going to tell you, I 100% agree with this. And I think, so two things there. One, the only reason that universities have been able to have this power is they had a stranglehold on opportunity.
Yes.
The number of employers that required a college diploma for things that have no business requiring a college diploma are part of the problem, because every parent had to send their kid to this place that's captured
and spend a fortune
and
of
spend
money
a fortune
in order to get an ideology
to get
that was
to
antithetical
indoctrinate
to their
an
values.
ideology.
The worst deal ever.
Yes, but they have to. But they have to, because the alternative was not even to be middle class anymore. Okay, that's over. Like when you're even seeing in the States, like Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, day one, this is a Democratic governor, says, this is nonsense. Go through every state job, and unless you can prove to me that it requires a college diploma, it's gone. No more college. 93% of all jobs, they gutted the college diploma. Like, this is happening. So it's weird, but that's the kind of thing. You have to create pluralism of opportunity. College, if you need to go, go. Godspeed, right? But if it's the only path to opportunity, we will continue to have this problem. Same with K-12. Guess what? If parents had a choice, if parents said, you know what, I don't like what's going on, I don't like what you're teaching, I'm going to take my kid over here, that stuff's not being taught for very long. It's part of that
Competition in the system.
competition will work, because I know what Americans' private values really are. So if we allow them to choose, we're going to win. And when we take those choices from everyday people, we are going to lose. Back to your second point, though, about something to do. I believe with all my heart in the U.S., the thing we're about to confront, where we will look back and say, we either course corrected and took free society to a whole nother level, or we lost it entirely. Believe it or not, I believe begins with 2026 and the 250th anniversary of the country, because we are going to have a conversation about who we are, whether you want to or not. So let's make that the fight. Who are we? What do we believe in? And what are we going to do about it?
Can I make a suggestion to you?
Please.
I think you need to bring a group of the people who are involved in that 250th anniversary and bring them here to see the kids. The ones
Yes.
that Michael was
Absolutely.
talking
Deal.
about
Hard
before.
yes.
Our
We're
kids,
in.
our kids, the one thing I'll say, I've written this publicly, are the defining generation. Everyone's worried when these kids get out from behind their phones and their screens and go do something that mattered. And 350,000 of them answered the call to go defend freedom and go fight back evil. And I think that kind of conversation, let's call it to 2026, that'll be the 78th year of Israel, coming on the 80th, and 250th year in America. If we can convene that conversation with young people, what are we going to do
Free
about
society.
it? It'll matter.
Yep. And the thing is we got to get back to being a people that builds,
Yes.
not just destroys.
Well,
Amen.
I want to thank you guys for coming, Mikey, for bringing Todd, Michael for coming here
Thank you, Alex.
to help,
Thank you.
and this was hopefully a productive discussion that can be seen by many people, and there can be a call to action. Thank you all.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.